Hello, everyone. Once again, my name is Langston Clark. I'm the founder and organizer of Entrepreneurial Appetite, a series of events dedicated to building community, promoting intellectualism, and supporting Black businesses. And we have a very special bonus episode here today that's a combination of two of the different mini-series that we have going on this year. One, the Movement Outdoors, that features Black folks who are entrepreneurs and adventurers in the outdoors. And then this other one that we had earlier this year that featured Black folks who are entrepreneurs and advocates in the realm of blockchain technology and cryptocurrency. And so what's interesting about this episode is that I think it was in June or July of last year, I had the opportunity to, in June or July of last year, I had the opportunity to attend Helium House. And Helium is a company that is seeking to decentralize wireless and 5G internet. And our guest speaker today, Ariel Seidman, who is the founder of Hivemapper, was one of the participants who was speaking on a panel there. And so what I wanted to do with this bonus episode is provide like our community with some exposure with some new technologies, some new things that are going on, because we oftentimes don't get access or early exposure to new groundbreaking and innovative technologies. And so I thought it would be natural to partner Sonya and Dakota Staples. We have Sonya here with us. Dakota may come in a little bit later, who are two Overlanders. And so you all may have heard their story before in one of our previous conversations, but they spend their life on the road. And so I thought it would be perfect to have Ariel, who is the founder of Hivemapper, and Sonya and Dakota be in conversation about how their lifestyle fits and matches with the technology that Ariel is trying to make accessible to the world, really, in a lot of different ways. And so I would ask that as we begin, if Ariel, if you could just give us a brief introduction about your history and the history to date of Hivemapper.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. This is a lot of fun. So Hivemapper, I will start with just kind of describing Hivemapper. So the idea is to basically build a new global map from the ground up, right? And so, Google Maps obviously exists. They're the dominant, mapping provider in the world, but we think there is room for another one that is much more cost effective in terms of, not so in terms of like what you as a consumer pay for, because obviously Google Maps is free, but what it costs to actually build the global map, right? And so the idea with Hivemapper is pretty simple. You buy this dash cam. So dash cam then you deploy it to a car. So you put in a car, you can mount it forward facing, you can mount it side facing. Most people do forward facing. You connect it to this app that we provide. And then what happens is, as you're driving, all that imagery then makes it back to Hivemapper. We take that imagery and transform it into data that effectively gets turned into maps, right? And so as you're driving and seeing, you're just going about doing your thing, right? You're driving errands, you're maybe a FedEx driver, maybe you're an Uber driver, maybe you're just running errands, whatever it is. It's an opportunity for you to help build this map if you have this great dash cam that we provide. Okay, so what's in it for you, in addition to helping us map the world and create some competition here against the likes of Google? The other thing is that by contributing your data, right? Because the data that we all generate every single day is incredibly valuable, right? Like if there's 5 million people all helping us build this map, the belief is that if the map turns into something that is incredibly valuable, you should share in the economic upside of that. Why? Because you've helped build it, right? And so if you've helped build the map, right, by driving around with this dash cam, you should then participate in the economic upside associated with that map as it becomes more and more valuable over time. And so the way that we do that, right, the way that we confer this kind of economic value to you is through crypto. And so what does that mean? So that means is, as you're driving around, you're earning our cryptocurrency called Honey, that effectively confers partial ownership, and I'm using that term loosely, that says, look, you're helping us build the map, right? There's 10 billion Honey tokens. You now, let's say, drive around, you earn 10,000 Honey tokens. Boom, you've effectively now taken part, or you have partial ownership in this map that we're all building together. Okay, so that's in terms of the contributors that are driving around.
Yeah.
On the other side are people then consuming the map, right? So who's consuming the map and paying for the map? So what most people don't realize is that with Google Maps, obviously, like if you open up Google Maps on your phone or your web browser, you don't pay for it, okay? But if you go to Uber, you go to TripAdvisor, you go to Airbnb, you go to Yelp, you go to 5 other million businesses roughly, those businesses are paying Google Maps to then integrate it into their products. And they're paying them a lot. And so really that's our customer. Our customers is the B2B, the businesses that are utilizing maps and geospatial and location data inside of their business. So we have a set of mapping APIs that customers can then pay for and hook up into their own products. And so that's our first business. There's other businesses that are kind of adjacent to that core businesses, to that core business in that market that will expand to over time, but way too early. Right now, the focus is very much on building up map coverage, right? So that when customers come to us, right, like an Uber or a FedEx or whatever, they want to see coverage, right? And so that's the first thing. So I'll pause there and kind of go into a whole different parts. We could talk about like where we're at from a coverage perspective. We could talk about the dash cam and how, easy and hard or whatever it is, whatever you want. So, but I'll pause.
So Ariel, I like that you gave the overview of Hivemapper and the Hivemapper dash cam. How about like, tell us a little bit about who you are? Like, how did you get to be like the queen or king bee Hivemapper? Like how did you get to the point of being who you are and launching it? What's the genesis of Hivemapper?
Yeah, so really my first job out of school was at a place called Yahoo. And I joined Yahoo way back when, like 2006 timeframe. And when I joined Yahoo, it was a fun place to be. And the reason it was a fun place to be was because we were still kind of neck and neck with Google at the time, right? Search, we had like 30% market share. They had like 35% market share. So it was very competitive. Maps, we had like 80% market share. And Google Maps was just kind of coming onto the scene. And what we saw, I was running the maps and location data and all that kind of stuff, right? Because roughly 30% of all queries that came into the search engine, we're talking about billions of queries, right, had some sort of geospatial map local dimension to them, right? Everything from, what's the population of the city to like, looking for pizza shops or, looking for directions or whatever it is. So that was a big focus of ours, is making sure that we could be really great at answering questions that had like a local geospatial dimension to them. And so what we started to see with Google Maps, so Google Maps launched, and initially they were utilizing different data providers, much like we would. So we would have data vendors who would sell us data. We would then combine the data, with different sources, whatever, manicure, edit the data. But it wasn't our data. We weren't going out there collecting the data. Google Maps launched Google Street View, and they started to really spend a lot of money in terms of going and collecting their own data. And what I observed as a result of that was the map quality at Google Maps got tremendously better. It was better than ours, right? And it was like kind of hard to look at because it was like, shit, this thing is like so much better than ours. And so, we went out and tried to go like to our CEO at the time and like basically get more resources, right? Like $200 million or whatever it was, to go and collect our own data. And it was kind of like almost like a hard no. It was like, here, take $20 million and go away, And it was like, what are you gonna do with $20 million? Like map California and then call it a day? Like, we weren't willing to compete at that level. Long story short, Google ran away with maps. But the Achilles heel that I observed, I left because I was pretty frustrated with like the lack of kind of, all right, maps is huge, right? Like maps is one of those products that billions of people use every day, right? There's not that many of them, right? People use social networking products every day. People use search every day. They use email messaging every day. They use Google Maps. they use mapping product, whatever, but there's like, that list isn't very long, right?
Yeah.
It's like 5 or 6 digital products that, billions of people use literally every day. And so what I observed was that clearly Google Maps won, right, in that time frame, but their Achilles heel has always been that it's really, really, really expensive for them to go produce the map, right? I mean, think about those Google Street View cars that you see. Each of those is $500,000, right? So if they go see a location, maybe once a year or once every 2 years or once every 4 years, kind of depending on where, in the world, they don't see that location for another, 18 months, 24 months, 36 months, right? Because it's just so crazy expensive, right? And I always felt like if you could dramatically bring down the cost of mapping, right, of what it takes to actually build the map, then you could build a much fresher map, right? Then you could build a great map in, parts of the world where frankly, Google doesn't invest a lot, like Southeast Asia, right? India is not very well mapped, right? It's a massive country, like 1 billion plus people, right? Many parts of Africa are very poorly mapped, right? Many parts of South America are very poorly mapped. So not only can you be fresher in places like Los Angeles and London and stuff like that, but you can also build really high quality maps in many parts of the world where Google, for better or for worse, has ignored, right? And so I left Yahoo. I started another company called GigWalk. It was kind of data collection on a global scale. And we had about 2 million users collecting data with their iPhones and Androids. The business it was okay business, quite frankly. It wasn't a great business. I won't bore everybody with all the details associated with that. But what I did realize was that you could get people to do things if you provided very simple tools, right? To collect the data. And if the data collection was passive, in other words, it didn't take you a lot of effort to go do, it was just kind of something that happened in the background, that was very, very, very powerful, okay? So I left GigWalk, started Hivemapper. We initially started with drones, right? And so I was like, look, if I'm gonna go build a map, this is like my opportunity. I know how to build maps, right? I know how to collect data on a large scale. I understand incentives. So I was like one of the, relatively small number of people in the world who kind of understood all the different pieces. Even with that though, I made a mistake. And so the mistake that I made in 2015 was we said, okay, look, there's this thing called drones. We're going to try to basically build this map with drones. What was interesting about drones on the positive side was, okay, drones can see they have the aerial perspective, right? But they fly below the clouds, which is very important, right? So they kind of fly below all the weather, and they can see a lot of kind of the street level signs like stop signs and red lights and parking restrictions and all that kind of stuff. So you kind of get a 2-for-1, right? Usually it's like you have street level, right, which is like a dash cam or 360 camera at the street level, and then you have satellites, right? And they're very different collection mechanisms. And so that was what I thought was interesting around drones. Drones did not work at all. It was very, very painful. So why didn't drones work? It was too active. It required too much effort. That was a big, big problem. The second was the battery technology never really improved, right? So a drone that flew for, let's say, 25 minutes, in 2015, that same drone now maybe flies for 30, 35 minutes. To really get the thing to scale, you need a drone that can fly for like 5 hours, 6 hours, right? On its own, right? That's when it would work. And we are a long ways away from that. And then the second thing was regulation. So, every little city was like, I don't want drones here. They're too loud. They're scary, whatever it is. And, when you're dealing with a situation where every little local municipality can say no drones allowed here and people can get fined or whatever, it didn't work, right? So we're it was a very, very tough moment in the business because we're shit, we're basically almost out of money. And so we had to pivot the business towards the dash cams. We were not at that time designing and building our own dash cam. We were using a third-party dash cam, which has its own set of issues. But we proved that worked and it scaled, right? Which was the critical piece that we had to prove to ourselves, right? I was like, okay, if we're going to go do this, like it has to work, right? Because drones didn't work. And so then I saw Helium, actually. I know you mentioned Helium. I saw them this is like 2019, and I thought that was a really interesting incentive mechanism that they were utilizing. And so I kind of put those two things together, the dash cams that was working, right, from a collection and mapping perspective, with Helium, the crypto incentive, and then boom, we're kind of off to the races since then. So I'll pause because that was a long-winded answer.
No, that was good. That was some good history. So what I want to do now, and Sonya, I know Nakota is somewhere in the woods right now, so I'm gonna let you hold it down for Staples Intense. And if you could just share your lifestyle, like what does it mean to be an overlander with Ariel? And then I guess we can get into your questions, and I'll let you kind of take the conversation over from there and ask whatever questions that you have of him while we have him here.
Yes, thank you, Langston, for having us. Ariel, like Langston said, Nakota and I, we are overlanders. And at its core, what that means is that we are vehicle-based adventurers. So we focus on traveling the world differently, typically by vehicle, driving across the country, driving through different continents and other countries to experience the culture, the community, everything that it has to offer. But one of the things that's unique about overlanding is it's typically a little more off-grid than your typical highway driving. And one of the things that is interesting to me so far about Hivemapper is that it looks like it expands beyond the normal map because you're looking at the everyday user for your input. And a lot of the places that we drive don't have hardcore maps because they do tend to be a little more remote. So cool. Was that what you were looking for, Langston?
That's good. And I guess, how do you, like, Sonya, how might you see, Hivemapper, the Hivemapper dash cams being part of your lifestyle, and how might you be able to integrate this into what you all do? So one of the things I thought was interesting, go ahead, you was gonna say something.
Go ahead. If you thought something interesting, I can pick up.
No, because I know that you all don't just travel in the United States, that you all travel like around the world. And so would there be issues with the dash cam? Like, let's say they're in the States, right, and they're using it, but then they take their truck to South Africa for 3 months. Is there going to be like an international like issue difference, like based upon the country saying, no, you can't do that here or whatever?
Yeah,
that's a good question. I can jump in, or if you want to go first, Sonya, up to you.
Yeah, I guess just to expound a little more on what Langston was saying. Like I said, we travel all over. Just last year, we traveled through Southern Africa, South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Zambia, and then all through Mexico, all around the Gulf Coast, back up through the Baja Peninsula. And, as we're traveling, typically we use offline maps like Gaia maps to track our maps and just to be aware of where we're located when we're in an area where we don't have service like Google. So I guess to Langston's point, is Hivemapper Dashcam available in other countries, other continents? And are you guys looking to do more of a highway drive or just roads in general?
That's a good question. So yeah, you can map out anywhere in the world, right? So let's start with that. The dash cam does work anywhere in the world. So it doesn't matter where you are. Now, so that's on the positive side. But I always want to just be like transparent. There are definitely, from a honey rewards perspective, right, in terms of, if somebody's, let's say, mapping in Lagos, Nigeria, or Mexico City, or, Sao Paulo, or London for that matter, they will definitely earn, let's say on average, more than somebody who's mapping in rural Kansas, right? Or a very, very remote part, right? Why? Well, there's more economic activity in places like Mexico City and Lagos and London than there are outside of those places. And so there's more demand for maps in general in places where there's a tremendous amount of economic activity. So that doesn't mean you won't earn anything. It just means, some people will be like, oh, I was mapping in LA and I earned so much. Or I was mapping in Lagos or Tel Aviv or wherever it is. And, they'll be like, well, I'm in this small town or wherever it is. And they kind of feel, a little bit annoyed and frustrated. And so I think we're very open and transparent about that, right? I think it's really important to say, like, look, we're not the ones that ultimately decide this, right? It's dependent really upon the customers who are using the map who effectively decide this more than us. So that's the first part. The second part is that you ultimately have to upload the imagery, right? The imagery that's coming off the dash cam, it flows from the dash cam to your iPhone or your Android device, and then you have to upload it, right? And so we have seen, like, there's a lot of people who are truckers, right? Or, and they'll say, look, I'm driving from, Sacramento to like Denver, right? And I may not have a good cellular connection or a good Wi-Fi connection even to be able to then upload the imagery. So I got to wait till I get to my house or to like a hotel or whatever it is. And so you can, like if I'm just driving, like if I get to the office or get home, I have a good Wi-Fi connection, right? That's like in an hour, half hour. So you do have this situation where, like, if you're very remote, you have no internet access, that you got to find a way to ultimately upload the imagery, right? So that's the other kind of gotcha. I don't know, it's a gotcha, but it's like something to be aware of.
Okay, that makes sense. So it sounds like you guys are focused more on where there are large population centers. So in terms of, this is a question Dakota put in the chat. He's asking, wouldn't rural areas be more desirable due to the lesser probability of a Hivemapper traveling through that area? So even though Denver and I don't know another big city in Colorado are the population centers, you would still want people to have data from when they travel from in between these two places.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, what we've observed so far, let's take like LA, which is one of our bigger regions that's actually doing quite well. And there's a couple others like in Seoul, Korea, and stuff like that. And so what we generally see and observe is that, let's take like the west side of Los Angeles, right? So like Santa Monica, I don't know, Brentwood, Venice, like that whole area, right? And so if you really just focus from a recruiting perspective, finding people who are in like the heart of LA, and let's say you have like whatever 500 contributors with a dash cam, is that over time they kind of make their way out to the more rural parts of Los Angeles. And by the way, Los Angeles is massive, or Los Angeles County, I should say, is massive, right? And so there's like these very, very, very rural parts of Los Angeles. And so, let's say to your example, in terms of Colorado, we're probably better off in terms of, focusing on Denver initially. And then over time, people kind of make their way into these other parts of Colorado, or they just tell their friends, right? So we have this term internally, which is we say, okay, focus on the cultural capitals of the country, right? And then it kind of just spreads from there. France would be another good example, right? You just focus on Paris, and then that's 20% of the population to begin with. And then, people have cousins or friends in, places like Marseille or Lyon or wherever. And then it kind of just organically flows from there.
Okay. How does it work when you guys have overlap? Like if Dakota and I, we had dash cams in both of our vehicles, we both live in Atlanta.
Yeah.
If we have them on both of our vehicles and we just so happen to upload the same street of data into Hivemap, how does that work in terms of the honey?
Honey takeaway. So I could be wrong about this one. I'd want to double check this, but I think it's basically who uploaded it first, if I recall correctly. If it was like literally like roughly exact same time. But I'd want to verify that, so don't quote me on that. And so that is definitely an issue in very specific situations, right? Especially if you have more and more contributors in a specific location. The thing that a lot of people don't realize with maps is that people look at our map and be like, oh, I don't know, like LA, it's I don't know, I forgot the exact coverage rate, right? But like there's a lot of coverage there now in LA, right? And there will be even more a week from now and 2 weeks from now, whatever. And so people were like, oh, it's done, it's over with. And I was like, no. Like maps are never done, right? And so, you know, the world is constantly changing. And the really hard part, right, is actually refreshing it. So if you all we have to do is map the world once, I'm not going to say that's easy, but that's not the hardest thing in the world to do, right? The hard part is how do you consistently update it and refresh? And so, you know, in your example where you guys were like on the same road the exact same time, yes, that will happen for sure, right, in specific situations. But in general, the Atlanta metro area is quite large, right? And so there will always be opportunities to be refreshing the map as well.
Yeah. And I guess not necessarily the exact same time, but maybe even if it was a neighbor, you know, just trying to understand how it works to collecting the honeycomb. What did you say it was? Honeycombs?
Yeah, just honey.
Honey.
So yeah,
Okay.
so it's Hivemapper, and then your earning or the rewards are honey.
Okay. So we're like bees collecting honey. Okay. Or making honey. Okay. So also do you collect the honey per mile, or how does that work?
That's a good question. No, it's not a straight per kilometer thing. And so the reason for that is like if we just rewarded people straight per kilometer, right? What would you do if you wanted to hack the system? You would just like, you know, drive around in a circle. That wouldn't make a very good map, right? And so it's much more based upon unique road kilometers, right? So let's take New York City, right? Because everyone knows the big names of the streets there. So if you're just driving up and down Park Avenue, there will probably be a lot of other people driving up and down Park Avenue as well. So what will happen, this automatically happens, the rewards decrease, right? Because there's so many people going up and down Park Avenue, and they basically get spread out to all the other parts of New York City where we don't have good coverage, right? So I always refer to it as the nooks and crannies of a city, right? The back alleys, the, you know, warehouse industrial parts, right? The backs of college campuses where the food gets delivered, right? Those are actually incredibly valuable and useful. Fewer people go there, right? But they're really important in terms of building complete coverage of a region. So yeah, there is some like smarts in terms of, you know, reducing honey token rewards and then increasing them in places where we do need coverage automatically.
Okay. So you said you guys are big
a lot of good questions. These are like exactly the questions everyone asks.
So you said you guys are big in the West Coast, but how does your coverage look in terms of East Coast, international countries like the Parises and the Lagoses, just larger cities across the world?
So we're definitely good in San Francisco, LA. We're good in New York as well. Chicago is coming along quite nicely as well. My hometown, so I'm very excited by that. And then, you know, if you look across in Europe, we're very strong right now in Lisbon, the Netherlands. Actually, most of Portugal is actually getting quite strong as well. So, you know, Porto and Lisbon. And then London is starting to pick up. That was slow to begin with, but now it's actually picking up quite nicely. And then if you look outside the United States, places like Sao Paulo are coming along really nicely. Seoul, I think, is at like 50% coverage. And Seoul region is actually quite large. So the South Koreans are definitely very into Hivemapper, which is cool to see. So those are some of the regions kind of off the top of my head. But you can go, like, what's cool about it is like all this data is transparent, right? So if you just go to hivemapper.com and then you go to explore, which is like just on the nav bar there, you can see the coverage, right? You can see how many contributors there are, you know, on the global level in a region. You can see like how recently certain roads have been refreshed or recently mapped. So all of this data is available, right? You can see, you know, okay, this person in this region is earning like this amount of honey tokens, right? So I can kind of like make some assumptions in terms of, okay, you know, if I'm driving in mapping, I can earn roughly the same. So all this data is transparent, and that's really important, right? The big, I don't know, mistake that I made was like, when I was doing gig walk, was not making the system very, very transparent. Why? Because if you don't make the system transparent and you're issuing some sort of reward, the natural tendency people have is to be very, very skeptical, right? And very, just don't trust a thing, as they probably shouldn't, right? And so it's really important that all of this information be out there, good, bad, and ugly. Like, there are some regions that aren't doing it as well, right? Well, we want that out there as well, right? And the reason we want that out there is just to ensure that there's transparency for all the contributors coming in and for customers as well. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing about transparency is, like, it's very uncomfortable initially, but then it's actually is a superpower, right? Because customers love it, right? And customers are human beings as well. And so they kind of realize, like, all right, this thing, last month or 2 months ago wasn't very strong, and now I'm seeing progression. So they kind of start to build trust, which is really important. And then contributors also, start to understand and trust the system, which is critical.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of, thank you for that first, but in terms of like the honey tokens, on average, how much honey does the average user earn?
So the median is, I think it's about 600 to 800 tokens per week. Okay. Honey tokens per week. There's definitely outliers, right? So like, there's some certain people in LA that I think have accumulated now like 50,000 or 70,000 honey tokens. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 people that are like at 200,000, right? So it does vary, whereas like there's some people in certain regions where they're not earning a ton because the region is so remote. So yeah, there's variability there. And we're very open in terms of, we want to ensure it is much more valuable in terms of the map. Like, if you just take, I don't know, 50 regions across the world, right? It is going to be much, much more valuable if those 50 regions are like 99% coverage, okay? Versus if those 50 regions all are like, 10% coverage, because all the coverage is kind of diffused over the entire world, then you haven't really hit critical mass in any specific region. And so that makes your data less attractive to customers.
Okay. So in terms of the value of the honey, how does it correlate to something that we're all familiar with? It's like a Bitcoin.
Yeah. So I can't like get too much into this from a legal perspective. So I'm like very limited in what I can say. There is some information online. I think the most important thing, the way I think about value in terms of like, hey, should you participate in building a map? One is, hey, do you drive enough for it to make sense, right? Like, I don't know, like I'm sure there's some people who only drive, maybe like they have a car, but they only like pull it out of the garage like once a week, right? And they go to the grocery store and that's it. Okay, maybe it doesn't make sense, right? I think the other types of vehicles is like if you're a bus and you're just doing the same route over and over every single day, probably also not very, useful, right? From a map perspective. So I think that's the first question. Okay, if you're then say, okay, yeah, I drive enough for this to make sense, like, do you believe in maps? And what I mean by that is, do you believe that there should A, be an alternative map to Google Maps, and B, do you think there's a value that we're all creating here by creating a new map, right? If you believe that, right, then, okay, I want to participate in this. I want to help move this project and move this map and towards something where it's actually attractive from a coverage perspective, from a freshness perspective to customers, right? And so that is the critical piece, which I think is really important. I think that from a crypto perspective, a lot of people got involved in projects and they had no clue. Like, they had no clue what the thing did. And, that's a really bad place to be. Because it's like pure, like, idiotic speculation. Like, you really have to understand is like, what is it that this project is trying to create that's of utility, right? And so that's why we really encourage people to take the time to understand, what's the utility of maps, right? Why do you need fresher maps, right? Why do you have to lower the cost of building a map, right? All the things that we're talking about today. And if you listen to conversations like we're having today, you read blog posts, you read some of the conversations that are happening on Twitter, and then you come to the conclusion like, yeah, this actually makes sense. I want to help create a new data asset here that's really valuable on a global scale, then great. We would love, to be on that journey with you.
So Sonya, if it's okay, I'm gonna ask a question or make a comment. One of the things that I noticed at Helium House when I was there in Austin is that I didn't feel like I was at a conference where people were trying to sell me something, right? Even though it looked nice and it was presentable, I didn't feel like people were playing like the psychological game, like when you go to church and they want you to give all your money away. I didn't feel like it was that, right? I feel like Ariel is saying, is that people were presenting like use cases for some service or some product that was attached to a cryptocurrency. And I looked at one of your tweets the other day, and you mentioned that like the utility that's associated with the cryptocurrency is what's important. And I think it's important for people who are like crypto curious, blockchain curious, to understand like what a use case is and how certain tokens, certain coins have particular use cases that are meant to make people's lives better. And that doesn't necessarily happen with Bitcoin. So, Ariel, I'm gonna ask this question. How would you talk about the importance of detaching how we think about cryptocurrencies with just Bitcoin? Because it seems like Bitcoin is Kleenex, right? Give me a Kleenex, but like all tissue is not Kleenex. So can you talk a little bit more about that, and then kind of like hone in a little bit more on like this idea of like a use case being important for the value of the token?
That's a great question. So the first thing is I am not a crypto native, right? I'm not religious about crypto. As I kind of described to you, crypto to me, is a tool. It's a technology, right? And technologies need to be deployed to the right use case, right? And if they're deployed to the right use case in the right way, then they can have value to customers, right? Or value to the entire ecosystem if you're kind of building an ecosystem. And so, the same thing is true with AI, right? Like there's going to be a lot of very, very important use cases where AI really pushes that field forward. And there will be some where it's very limited, right? And so if you look at cryptocurrency, so yes, there's Bitcoin that, everyone knows that it has a big brand that's not going anywhere. It's fine, it's great. But I think when you look at crypto and cryptocurrencies, right, or crypto tokens is probably the better term to use here, and say to yourself, okay, let's use Filecoin, right? Filecoin fundamentally is around storage, right? Data storage. Data storage exists today, right? You can go to AWS, you can go to Microsoft Azure, you can go to Google Cloud, and you can pay them, right, to store your data. Filecoin is saying, look, we're going to provide a storage product, a data storage product, but we're going to do it in a new way that rewards people for contributing their storage capacity to this network, right? And by doing that, we can help bring down the cost of storage, right? So that's a very clear, understandable use case with an existing market. And so I always say to people, it's like, you really have to understand what's behind it. Helium, which you brought up, we use Helium, right? In the Hivemapper dashcam, we're actually utilizing the Helium IoT network to do location verification, okay? So we're a customer of Helium. And without Helium, could we do location verification? Yes, it would be a lot more expensive, be a lot more complicated. So I love it, right? It's very useful. And so I think the analysis that you have to use with the crypto token projects, right, is the same analysis that you should use when you're, thinking about involving in any sort of project or any sort of effort, right? Like, what is the underlying utility here? I will add one additional thing, right? I know a lot about Waze. I was a contributor to Waze in the early days. So there's two parts of Waze. There's ways that you and I use in terms of, hey, traffic, directions, all that kind of stuff, report an accident or whatever it is. We are providing a tremendous amount of data and value to Waze. Then there's another part of Waze where there's people sitting behind a desk manually editing a map, okay? And there's about 30,000 of those people. It is very, very tedious kind of work, right? You're like literally like, okay, here's a stop sign, here's a red light, the name of the street is over here. So you're like going into this tool, this complicated tool, and doing that. Without those people, there is no Waze, like full stop, right? Because they really made the map and the map data. When Waze got acquired by Google for $1.3 billion, the employees made out, right? Because they all had stock options, as they should, by the way. Investors made out, as they should. They took risk, right, with their capital. But those Waze editors, those 30,000 people, made nothing. And that's wrong. And what we're trying to do here is kind of correct that, right? Our data has value, right? If you're contributing to this, right, without your data, we don't have a map. And we want to make sure that, if this thing actually gains enough steam here to become really important and really valuable, which we think it will, right, then, okay, you're going to share in the economic upside associated with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one, I want to thank both of you guys for explaining the technology behind Hivemapper Dashcam, because that was really helpful for me in terms of just understanding how the value of it. But what you were just saying recently about the actual users contributing to the platform and how, long-term you can make money if the company sells, it's profitable for the users because now you have honey. Unlike with the Waze platform, we contribute to Waze every day when we use it and got nothing. How is Hivemapper working to, one, make sure that there's a diverse pool of users? Because, a lot of times with technology, Black and brown people are kind of left out. And honestly, Nakota and I wouldn't know about Hivemapper Dashcam if it wasn't for Langston. So one, how is Hivemapper working to make sure there's a diverse pool of users to make sure that like all neighborhoods are covered? Because of course, if you live in one neighborhood, you may not go into another neighborhood. So just to make sure that there's full coverage. And then in terms of just equity, in terms of users, that more people have access to the platform and just the ability to contribute and benefit from it.
Okay, so I'm gonna talk about this from couple of different answers to that. So let's start with neighborhood level, because I think that's really important, right? Because you're right, like there's certain neighborhoods that like people go into more and less, and I think that's a big problem. And from a mapping perspective, I always say with Google Maps, it's always funny how like Palo Alto. So for those of you who don't know, Google's located in Mountain View, which is in Silicon Valley. So that's the city that they're located in. That's where their headquarters is. And right next door to Mountain View is a very wealthy city called Palo Alto. And a lot of Google executives and other Google employees live in Palo Alto. And it's always funny how like well mapped Palo Alto is. They all live there. So of course, like they want it super well mapped, right? And so, but look, from a honey token rewards perspective, let's just take Palo Alto as an example. Like if that started to get really, really well mapped, then the honey tokens for that would then get moved to other neighborhoods, right? And so it would automatically decrease the incentive to be remapping Palo Alto, because we're like, hey, we got it. We have enough coverage here. We have enough freshness here. We now move the honey token rewards to other neighborhoods, where maybe there's not enough, right? And so it creates another opportunity to maybe get locals from those neighborhoods to become mappers, because all of a sudden the economic opportunity is really significant. The other part here is like, look, Google is a public company, right? And as a public company, they serve their shareholders, right? I think we can't forget that. And so what are they trying to do in terms of their decisions? And I used to be one of these product managers sitting in one of these organizations. You're making decisions based upon what is most monetizable, right? So guess what? London is much, much easier for Google Maps to monetize than Lagos, Nigeria. Like full stop, right? Like that is just the reality of the situation right now. And so any product manager is then making a decision in terms of the frequency and the quality of maps in London is going to be higher than Lagos, Nigeria, because they can monetize it better, right? And so I think that's the core of the issue, which is like here, what we're saying to folks is that there's local, in many cases, they're entrepreneurs, right? Like there's a guy in Lagos who's a local entrepreneur who wants to, he's buying 10, 15, 20 different dash cams. He then wants to see Lagos really, really well mapped, right? He's distributing them to Uber drivers and Lyft drivers and all that kind of stuff, or local delivery people. I don't know if Uber and Lyft are there. And then he's helping map, right? And so I think that's the other dimension. I'll answer the question maybe also from a socioeconomic perspective, right? Which is the people who will do best, right, on Hivemapper are the people who are driving a lot, right? The FedEx delivery guy, the Uber driver, the Lyft driver, right? And so clearly there's going to be a much, much, much wider diversity of socioeconomic, right? It's not like, hey, to be successful with Hivemapper, you're sitting behind your desk all day long and, typing away or doing whatever it is. And so I do think it appeals to a much wider, diverse socioeconomic level.
Yeah, and just listening, it makes sense. When you were explaining it, it seems like it's for the Uber driver, the Lyft driver, the DoorDash, the Uber Eats, people who are kind of all over a city. So just wondering, like, how are you working to make those people informed of what Hivemapper Dashcam is in order to help build the platform?
Well, part of it is doing things like this, right? So we can, talk to a very, very wide and different kind of audiences, right? We definitely will advertise and promote it with places where they hang out, right? We haven't done this yet, but one of the ideas that we're contemplating is like next to airports where all the Uber drivers and Lyft drivers hang out is like doing some billboards there, because they all like break and stuff like that. Like they obviously want to talk to their buddies and take a little bit of a break. So reaching out to that community in their specific way is also really important. So, I mean, up until now, it's kind of just grown organically, to be really honest, right? It's been people like hearing about us, reaching out to us. Over time, I'm sure that we're going to have to develop new methods to make sure that we're hitting kind of all of these different audiences and kind of meeting them where they're at currently.
Yeah. So there's a question in the Q&A, and I'm going to try to ask it the best way I can. So Dimitri is actually the guy, Team Bird. He's the guy that actually told me all about crypto stuff, helium, and all of that. And so he's asking a question: will there be integration in the future with the Solana Web3 Saga phone, or would there one day be? And I guess he's saying, is there a way in the future where you can hive map from your phone? Like, is that something that you envision for what's coming next with Hivemapper?
It's a good question. So let's see. We do want to integrate with the Saga phone. So Hivemapper is built or uses the Solana blockchain. And we do that because it's very, very cost effective, right? And so as we kind of, maps are very, very large and be a lot of millions of contributors, millions of transactions, we need something that's very cost effective, and Solana is incredibly cost effective. So yeah, so we are discussing with them ways that we can integrate the dash cam with the Solana Saga phone to make that end-to-end experience really awesome. Still very, very, very early conversations. So that's part one. Part two is, do I imagine that someday people will use their phone? The answer to that is probably no. Here's why. So the problem with the phone is that, you know, most people just carry one phone, right? They're not like, okay, I don't have like 2 phones or 3 phones. Like, you know, their older phone, maybe they give it to their kids or they resell it or whatever, right? Most people don't actually have 2 phones. And so that means is that if you want to map with your phone, you got to all of a sudden take your phone. I'm just going to take my phone out here real quick. So you got to take your phone out, and then you have to like put it into your dashboard. And then that means is you can't use it to listen to music. You can't listen, you know, use it for navigation purposes in terms of a map. You can't take calls because it is like all of a sudden out of reach, right? And so we really believe that it has to, in order, the dash cam helps make the collection contributor experience passive, right? You install it, you take 10 minutes to install it, do everything, set it up, even in some cases faster than 10 minutes. And then you forget about it, right? Like you get into your car the next day, like your phone automatically next to the dash cam, and then you're just driving, right?
Yeah.
You're like moving stuff around constantly.
Yeah.
I do think that we have to have more kinds of dash cams, right? This goes back to the question Sonya you was asking before. It's like right now the dash cam is $550. It is expensive, right? Like especially if you go outside the United States, you know, places like South America and Southeast Asia and Africa and stuff like that, $500 is a lot, right? And so so a big challenge and opportunity for us is bring down the cost of the dash cam, and provide more different kinds of dash cams, right? Like some people want a dash cam that is, you know, can be mounted exterior, right? Some people want it to look like this, right? Whatever. And so there's a lot of opportunity to create different kinds of dash cams over time, and we'll do that.
So speaking of the dash cam, can you explain the Hivemapper dash cam and like where we can get it, and like where do you mount, like all of the things that Hivemapper dash cam?
Yeah. So you can go to hivemapper.com, and then you just click dash cam, and then there's 2 different dash cams. So there's the one that I mentioned, $550. It's the original model. It's a great dash cam. Then there's a higher end model called the S. Really, the S is for a very specific kind of driver that needs the 30 FPS 4K video stream that's saved locally on their device, right? On the dash cam, I should say. If you don't need that feature, then you are totally fine getting the Hivemapper dash cam, the original model, okay? The Hivemapper dash cam, basically now, if you order it today, I think you should get it. We should ship it by March 10th, right? So right around the corner. And from an installation perspective, most people just put it right under their rearview mirror, right? So it just sits there right under your rearview mirror. You know, you put a little hook there, and then boom, you know, you're good to go. You need it. It basically plugs into your cigarette lighter, right? That's the power source that it pulls from. So you do need a cigarette lighter. There's an adapter, like if you have a USB or USB-C and you don't have a cigarette lighter, like some of the higher end cars today don't have cigarette lighters. There's an adapter that they make, which is like $1 or $2. It's like pretty cheap. And then so forward facing, right under the rearview mirror, it has to, this is critical, it has to be seeing like all the street signs, right? And all the lane markings and all that kind of stuff, right? Some people sometimes point it like way too high, right? So it's like looking at the sky, or they point it like way too low, right? And so now there's like some tools in the app that will help you like get the right image, right? Or the right positioning and mounting level. So that's the forward facing, or you could do side facing. It has to be facing the sidewalks, right? Because what we're really trying to do is collect like imagery of like, what's the name of the business? What's the address there? What are the parking restrictions? All that kind of stuff. So that's the side facing one. So like a lot of delivery people use that one actually, probably like 80-20. So 80% of the people do the forward facing, 20% do the side facing. You know, the Uber drivers and Lyft drivers, they're more interested in the front facing because if they get into an accident, they want the imagery to like prove that.
Yeah. So Sonya, I think if you have another question, Sonya, I'm gonna let you ask, and then I'll ask the last question afterwards because we got about like 15 minutes left and I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
I actually do have one more question. In terms of the honey and its value, is there a potential, say, I don't know, we talked about Lagos already in the conversation, so I'll just use that as example sake. Right now, Lagos isn't as valuable as, say, a Paris. But if I go to Lagos and I do mapping in Lagos, is there an opportunity in the future for the Lagos input that was done previously to increase in value just based on desirability at a future?
Yeah. So there's kind of two different, there's two different reward mechanisms from a honey perspective. So one is just basically map coverage, right? And so what this is basically saying is whether or not somebody uses the map, just having coverage there is valuable, right? So like the best analogy is like if you go into like a grocery store, you know, and you go to the aisle with all the whatever the soda, you need to have like inventory, right, for people to choose from. So, you know, some people want to choose Coke or Diet Coke, but you need product, right? So coverage is effectively our product that customers can go see. Now, some customers may choose and say, look, I want to use Paris, right? Or I want to like, you know, buy the Madrid data or whatever it is, okay? If you mapped one of those locations, there's an additional honey token reward called map consumption, right? Let's take your example of Lagos, Nigeria. So you go map Lagos, Nigeria today, you know, you got the coverage reward, great, thumbs up. But then, you know, whatever, 6 months later, 5 months later, people start to use the map that you created. Then you're going to get an additional reward called map consumption reward because now people are using it.
So it's almost like a bonus.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea there is like trying to reward people saying like, look, if there's customers using the data, you're going to be pretty excited, right? It's good for you, it's good for them. And then it kind of creates this like positive loop, right? Which is like, you'll want to go and remap that area, right? Because now customers stuff.
That's good. I didn't even know that. I missed that somewhere. I did a lot of research for this. I never heard that. Was I not paying attention when I watched the other YouTube videos? Anyways.
Yeah, that was a good question. So we're gonna thank Dakota for that one.
Yeah, that was good. So before we got started in the actual recording of this podcast, I mentioned to Ariel that I saw him speaking on a panel at Helium House. And that, man, was interesting. In Helium House, there was only one Black person who was speaking on the panel, and there was a few of us sprinkled in the audience. And so, one, I appreciate you coming here to share this information today with us and with our community, and your openness to do that. And you mentioned, thanks to Sonya's great question about how like our community can take advantage of this opportunity and really be instrumental in mapping our own communities. But one of the things that I brought up was that my wife really is the person who exposed me to like what startup culture was and the benefits to working with a startup and being there when it's actually a startup, right? And so you talked about the benefits of being a Hivemapper from actually mapping, right? Can you give us like your perspective on what it means to be someone who is actually working at Hivemapper, like in the office, building, you know, I don't know, data, you know, software, all of the things that go into that? Because in my day job, I'm a university professor and I try to tell students about best opportunities. And so they might say, hey, I'm going to go map with Google. Why should they go map with Hivemapper, right? What are the opportunities there for a startup that is at the beginning of what it's doing?
So from it, like if you want to come work at Hivemapper, right, I think is the core of the question. And I want to also touch on, maybe kind of bring it back to the question Sonya asked in terms of diversity, because I think they're interrelated, right? So first, from like, if, you know, regardless of, you know, if you're finishing college, there's going to be a lot of people that are definitely attracted by the Google brand name or the AWS brand name or whatever, or Amazon or whatever it is, Apple. Look, those are great companies. I got nothing wrong with them. I mean, I worked at a big company for a couple of years as well when I worked at Yahoo. So maybe the right decision for you coming out of college is to go work at a bigger brand, right? But I do think that there's a specific type of person. And frankly speaking, just for myself, in terms of my personality, I stayed too long at the big company, right? I felt like I needed a stamp on my resume that said like big company approved, he made it or whatever it is. And I was like, looking back on it, I think it was a little bit overrated, quite frankly. But I think if you're very ambitious, right? If you're okay with uncertainty, right? If you're okay operating in environments where you don't have a lot of information, but you still need to move forward, right? If that energizes you, if that excites you, then a startup is a much better place to be than the likes of Google, right? You mean Google, like they have all the data in the world, so they can tell you like, boom, okay, we've got to fix this bug because we have this data over here. We got to fix this bug over here because we have this data over there. And so I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's easier, right? Whereas like a small company, you don't have all this data and you're trying to create something new and different, right? Very uncertain. But you still need to be able to formulate a plan, right? Look at whatever limited data you have, use your judgment, and then execute and move forward, right? And guess what? 2 steps backward, 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, right? That will happen. If you're the kind of person that, that's very frustrating and, people are rejecting you and you all of a sudden feel like crap and all that kind of stuff, then like, again, maybe that's not for you, but for some people that energizes them, right? Like, okay, like the customer said no this time, but like, okay, why? Why'd they say no? Okay, I'm going to try to fix that, right? And so I think it is very dependent upon the kind of personality you have and what you like to do. Like for me, this is, the more uncertainty there is, the more risk there is, the more exciting it is for me.
Yeah.
And so if that speaks to you, then I think a startup is a great environment to be in. And I want to go back to, what I really believe in from a diversity perspective in terms of building, we use a lawyer. She's a fantastic lawyer at a great law firm, a Black woman. And so then we said to her, look, we want a lawyer to do some other kind of transactional work. Your law firm will charge us like an arm and a leg because it's like one of these big, law firms that she's at. She's like, look, you should talk to my friend, right? Her friend is an incredible lawyer, has a boutique law firm, right? And also happens to be an incredibly talented, very, very well-educated Black woman who's done very well for herself. And so boom, right? All of a sudden, you start to get connected to other folks, right? Who are Black, and you get integrated into that community, right? And so I think it's really, really important as a company that we get integrated into all these different communities, because that's how you get introductions, right? Like it's through friends, it's through professionals, it's through whatever. And so the more kinds of different people you have inside the company who come from different communities, the more opportunities you're going to get linked up to them, right? So I think that's a really important lesson for all companies, right? Like you want to choose the best team, you want to be able to choose from everybody, right? You don't want to just choose from a small sliver, I just want to look at this tiny little community over here. You're not going to choose the best team, right? But if you have a much, much wider set of people to choose from, you're gonna be able to choose a much better team.
Yeah. I think that was a great way to end the podcast. That was a great answer, Ariel. That was right on point and right on time. So I want to thank you both for coming on today. I would encourage our listeners to check out Hivemapper and the Hivemapper Dashcam. I would also encourage our listeners to check out Sonya and Dakota of Staples and Tents. They do great events in the outdoors, but they also have an awesome YouTube channel where they chronicle their journeys around the United States and the world as Overlanders. So once again, I thank you both for joining us, and I appreciate you for being here.
Thank you, Langston.
Thank you. Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yep. Ariel, real quick, one last